Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Ratking, titled So It Goes. How much does it matter where you're from in music? Because in some genres, nobody will care one way or the other. As long as the music is good, most heavy metal or pop or indie acts, they couldn't care less which city or town from whence you came. But when it comes to music that demands a certain degree of authenticity, but also harkens back to the community at large, well, location, it starts to matter. You see a lot of this in country music, where regionalism across the United States and Canada, it plays a bit of a factor in defining referenced landmarks or delivering a very specific, targeted appeal. Now that's one reason why country acts love to reference rural tropes in their music, whether it's just building a sense of atmosphere or a sense of community, or just affirming the fact that they came from that sort of upbringing. It's a nationalist spirit in microcosm. It's very much playing to that regionalist trope and spirit. And yet, in one of the many of the bizarre similarities between country and hip-hop, rap music does a lot of the same thing. Thankfully, we've mostly moved past the eras of regional conflicts between West and East Coast, but there are still plenty of references and callbacks to the places from where these artists came, to frame their stories, to add richer detail and context, and give the music a definite sense of place. Both country and hip-hop acts have a sense of richer history behind them that they want to hold on to. And defining one's place with respect to that history, it's a major part of some rappers' careers. So, when I started looking at Ratking, an upstart alternative hip-hop duo from New York known for chaotic and noisy production in the vein of acts like Death Grips and Clipping, and with a reportedly strong punk sensibility, I was curious, and despite some of my own personal issues with this particular brand of noise rap. After all, the Beastie Boys were New York rappers who had inclinations towards punk, and they were one of the most influential and awesome acts to ever rock the music world. So thus, it made a certain amount of sense to at least get a passing familiarity with this sort of music coming out, even if the production style wasn't all to my taste. So, I picked up So It Goes, and I gave it a couple spins. How'd it turn out? This is an interesting album. Not least that it took me a lot of listens over the past week or so to really decode why I actually ended up liking Ratking So It Goes, but don't quite love it. It's definitely something that's really far removed from mainstream hip-hop, but at the same time, it was a lot more accessible for me than an act like Death Grips, and I was really surprised how much I really appreciated the subtle touches by the end of this record. Enough so that I'm going to recommend it for you here if you got a taste for hip-hop production that's decidedly off the beaten path. So you know what? Let's start by talking about some of that instrumentation and production, shall we? Here's the funny thing. The funny thing you'll notice is that after the shock at the cluster of noisy effects all jostling for your attention at the very front of the mix, is that there is melody underscoring these tracks. The production isn't so much expansive, but a block of competing sounds, a cacophony of voices and samples and clattering percussion, with the occasional bits of distorted horns or classy jazz samples providing something of a driving melody. It's intentionally claustrophobic, meant to create the images of an overcrowded city. And god damn it, if Ratking just doesn't nail this in their production. The juxtaposition of decaying old school class with new world samples and rhythms, all dragged through a clattering mire of crackling fuzz, doesn't exactly paint a pretty picture of New York City. But you know what, for me, it certainly feels accurate. And I'll admit right out of the gate that this production, at least for me, can be a little too overstuffed at points, especially when the various vocal samples in the mix have very similar volume levels to the actual rapping. And look, it's clear that's intentional. They're trying to, in order to force you to listen to those voices amongst the masses, but yet it can get a little distracting. And yeah, even though I love the riotous energy of Remove Ya, the bleakness of So Sick Stories, the thrumming, pulsing beats of Puerto Rican Judo, and some of the classier elements of Eat and Snow Beach, I have to say that the chipmunk voice effect on the title track, I'm sorry, I hate that effect, and it was just intolerable. Now, this takes us to the rappers themselves, Wiki and Hack, and let me stress, this album, for the many moments of dense, clever wordplay, isn't exactly a an incredibly technically driven rap album. Once you manage to worm your way into the same headspace as these particular guys, really the songs and their flows are actually pretty straightforward once you get used to it. But honestly, I'd argue that's not much of a problem. When you have beats and production this layered and thick, and you're looking to paint a picture this vividly detailed, a straightforward approach to your direct delivery, it works really well. Wiki comes across as more outwardly aggressive and more revelatory in what he's willing to give to the public here, while Hacks Hunter, it's more understated, but yet it's no less effective. And yet they both bring a certain amount of clarity to their purpose, to paint a very vivid, stark picture of modern New York life for people in their demographic and economic situation. And there's a lot of facets to that picture in defining these guys as characters in the city in which they live, both in how it drove them to rap music and away from the streets and some of the problems in their lives. And when they address some of those problems in the context of New York City as a whole, that they have some of their strongest tracks, namely the anti-cocaine Snow Beach, the Stop and Frisk Condemnation on Remove Ya, and Eat, where Wiki deals with an Oxycontin addiction that nearly destroyed his life in the past. Yet, both guys seem very much aware that their voices are just a few in the vast canyons of skyscrapers that is New York City. And on songs like So Stick Stories featuring King Cruel and the title track, they touch on the universal feelings of loneliness and depression, and eventual resolve that to at least be heard in some capacity as a voice within the city. And if we're looking for a theme of this album, I'd argue it comes through most here, that people of their, and my generation by extension, we aren't always being heard, and even despite the cacophony, their stories are just as relevant, if sometimes even not more so. And this is arguably where I run into the smallest gripe I do have with this album, because this theme that I described, it's powerful, and the texture and its realization, it's incredibly immersive and pulling you into their very vivid, well-told stories. But the stories that they do tell, they feel a little bit disjointed, and they don't really add up to a completely cohesive picture. Now, to be fair, they're describing their lives, and that makes sense, and it really fits a defined narrative, and given the sense of realism that Ratking is trying to invoke, that all makes sense. But at the same time, the album does start to drag a little bit at points when they revisit certain topics. I start wishing that this album had a little bit more narrative ambition besides just painting that incredible picture. We get fragments of more stories, I just wish more of them materialized into more of a story here. Yet even still, I really do respect So It Goes by Ratking a lot. And while it took me a long time to get into this album, one of the reasons this review is so late, there's a real potent statement beneath it and two clever and solid rappers delivering that statement. And look, I'll admit the production will probably never completely be my thing. I can't argue it does a really good job for what it is. So as such, yeah, 8 out of 10. And definitely a recommendation if you're looking for some hip-hop that's off the beaten path. Friendly warning here, this material is not immediately accessible, especially to mainstream listeners, and it will take multiple listens to truly appreciate this record, but these are voices that you're gonna definitely want to hear, so check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums coming up this year that you'd like me to cover, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark. I'll see you next time.